Welcome back. Whether you are prepping for a major presentation or you are just trying to catch up on the latest industry shifts.
Or if you are just insanely curious about how the world works, you are definitely in the right place.
Yeah, you are. Today, we're embarking on a completely fascinating deep dive into a topic that affects literally every single one of us. We are looking at the rapidly evolving intersection of artificial intelligence and healthcare.
And it is an incredibly high-stakes arena. The source material we are working with today frames this challenge in a way that completely sidesteps the usual tech industry talking points.
That is the best part. We are pulling directly from a really eye-opening text titled The Architecture of Accountability in Healthcare AI.
It is a brilliant piece.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to uncover what the text describes as a hidden structural trap in modern healthcare. We're going to explore why an AI that makes the perfectly right medical prediction might actually be creating a highly dangerous system.
Right, a system where absolutely no one is accountable if something goes wrong.
Exactly. And here is why you listening right now need to care about this. You are either a patient, a caregiver, or someone who interacts with highly automated systems on a daily basis.
We all are.
Right. Understanding who is actually in charge when a machine makes a life-altering decision isn't just some abstract academic theory. It is crucial for your own health, your safety, and your peace of mind when you walk through those hospital doors.
It is a paradox that sits right at the heart of our modern medical infrastructure. We are building systems that are incredibly capable, but architecturally hollow when it comes to human responsibility.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the most common defense you hear whenever anyone questions the rollout of AI in hospitals. People always say, well, it's statistically accurate.
The accuracy argument.
Yeah, and to be fair to our source text, it acknowledges that this is often true. AI vastly outperforms humans at massive pattern recognition. It is better at early detection across huge data sets. It is undeniably precise.
It is. These models are remarkably capable at crunching numbers. But there is a very crucial line in the sand drawn here.
What's the line?
What's fascinating here is how the source breaks down this core distinction. It explicitly states that accuracy is not the same as safety, and it is definitively not the same as accountability.
But we tend to conflate those things, don't we?
Constantly. We assume a correct answer from a computer naturally equals a safe outcome for a patient. But in a complex environment like a hospital, that is a massive logical leap. Accuracy is a property of models. It belongs to the algorithms and the code.
Okay.
Accountability, on the other hand, is a property of systems. It belongs to the people, the nurses, the doctors, and the institution.
Wait, hold on. Let me make sure I have this. That sounds a bit counterintuitive. If the machine is 99% accurate at reading my X-ray, how is that not inherently safer for me as a patient? Getting the math right seems like the ultimate goal.
A model can accurately identify a tumor, but the model cannot take responsibility for formulating the treatment plan, managing your pain, or answering your family's questions.
Ah, okay, that makes sense. Accuracy is the math, accountability is the human system wrapped around it.
Exactly. And the material notes that AI actively blurs this line. Because when an AI generates a recommendation, say it flags a scan or suggests a highly specific dosage, and that recommendation looks perfectly precise and evidence-based, it feels incredibly authoritative to the people using it.
It feels like objective truth.
It carries the weight of objective truth. And because it feels so authoritative, this creates a terrifying inversion in our healthcare settings. The machines suddenly become the confident actors,
While the human doctors...
while the highly trained human doctors and nurses are reduced to hesitant overseers.
Wow. Confident machines and hesitant humans. That inversion is the trap. The system moves forward smoothly, the hospital processes people faster, but the responsibility lags entirely behind.
And it is important to know this isn't a critique of the incredibly hardworking people in healthcare.
Right. No, it is a structural critique. Complex systems don't usually fail because one individual doctor malfunctions. They fail because responsibility becomes hopelessly diffused across the interfaces between the confident machine and the hesitant human.
Which brings us perfectly to the biggest buzzword in the entire tech industry.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
The absolute favorite get-out-of-jail-free card for AI developers everywhere. The human in the loop.
The human in the loop. You hear it all the time. Everyone says, don't worry, the AI isn't making the final call. We have a human in the loop. It sounds so warm and fuzzy, like there is a cozy doctor in a hand-knit sweater personally double-checking every single line of code.
It sounds like a guaranteed safeguard. But the text aggressively dismantles this illusion. In practice, having a human in the loop frequently does not resolve the accountability problem at all.
It doesn't.
No, in fact, it can sometimes make it worse by providing a false sense of security.
Why is that? Walk us through what actually happens in the hospital when a human is supposedly in the loop.
Think about the actual workflow. By the time a clinician is asked to review an AI-generated recommendation, so much has already happened. Triage has already occurred. Crucial hospital resources have already been allocated.
Wait, let's pause on care pathways and triage for the second. Basically, by the time the doctor looks at the screen, the computer has already decided how urgent the patient is, what wing of the hospital they belong in, and what general bucket of treatments they are eligible for.
Exactly. The patient's care pathways have already been heavily constrained by the algorithm's initial sorting. The doctor isn't starting from a blank slate.
They are stepping onto a moving train.
That is a great way to picture it. The clinician is downstream of momentum. The machine has built up all this institutional momentum, and the human is just standing at the end of the track.
So what does the text say is actually required? Because obviously just putting a human at a desk isn't enough.
To actually have accountability, the text lays out 3 incredibly strict conditions that must be met simultaneously. It is not enough to just have a human sitting at a desk clicking an approve button.
Let's look really closely at these 3 conditions because this is where the theory hits the messy reality of a hospital. What is the first one?
Condition number 1 is proximity to the decision point.
Proximity meaning physically close.
Logical proximity. The human has to be close enough to the origin of the choice to actually understand why it is being made. They cannot just be reviewing the final output.
Give me an example of what that looks like.
Think about a nurse at 3 in the morning. If an algorithm suddenly changes a patient's risk score from low to critical, but doesn't explain which of the 50 vital signs triggered that change.
The nurse has no proximity to the decision.
Right. They're just reacting to a flashing red light.
Okay, so proximity means actually seeing the math, or at least the logic behind the curtain. That makes total sense. What is the second condition?
Condition number 2 is the authority to override the system.
That seems obvious.
You would think so. But if the AI says discharge the patient, and the human doctor disagrees based on their gut feeling or a visual assessment, they must have the actual institutional power to say no.
And I imagine they have to be able to say no without getting in trouble.
Exactly. They must be able to say no without risking their job facing administrative punishment or having to fill out 10 pages of justification forms that effectively penalize them for disagreeing with the computer.
I can entirely see how that plays out. If overriding the machine makes your shift an hour longer because of paperwork, you are just going to stop overriding the machine.
You take the path of least resistance.
Right. Is there a third piece to this puzzle?
There is, and it is perhaps the rarest one in modern medicine. Time to reflect before the action is locked in. The human must have the temporal space to evaluate the AI's logic before the momentum of the hospital takes over.
So proximity, authority, and time.
Yes. If you remove even one of those 3 things, accountability completely collapses, even if a human is technically present.
There is a quote from the material here that just stopped me in my tracks. It says, "A human who can observe but not intervene is not a circuit breaker. They are a witness."
That is such a heavy realization.
Let's really think about that for a second. Imagine you are sitting in the passenger seat of a car, speeding down the highway at 90 miles an hour. You have a perfect view of the road. You can see the traffic, you can see the speedometer, you can see the hazard up ahead.
You are in the loop.
Technically, yes, you are in the loop of that car's journey, but they took away your steering wheel and they took away your brake pedal. You can observe, but you cannot intervene. You aren't driving, you are just a witness to the trash.
That analogy captures the danger perfectly. We are placing highly trained professionals in the passenger seat, strapping them in, and then blaming them when the autonomous car hits something simply because they were in the vehicle.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because if you are listening to this, you might be wondering if this is so dangerous. Why are hospital administrators and tech companies so thrilled with these systems? How do they justify rolling them out so quickly?
It comes down to a massive disconnect in how success is measured. AI systems are almost entirely evaluated on aggregate outcomes. We are talking about big picture population level statistics.
Like dashboards and spreadsheets.
Exactly. An administrator looks at a dashboard and sees reduced readmission rates across 1,000 patients. They see optimized hospital throughput.
Let's break down optimized hospital throughput so it doesn't just sound like corporate jargon. Think of throughput like turning over tables in a busy restaurant. The hospital wants patients diagnosed, treated, and discharged as safely and quickly as possible to make room for the next person in the waiting room.
And the AI optimizes that table turnover perfectly.
But a spreadsheet doesn't feel pain. Harm doesn't happen in the aggregate. Harm happens locally. It happens to the individual patient sitting in that room whose unique struggle doesn't fit the algorithm's perfect table turnover model.
That is the crucial distinction. The source lists the highly specific, very local ways this harm manifests.
How does it show up?
It shows up in delayed care for a specific individual whose rare symptoms didn't neatly fit the algorithm's parameters, so they got shuffled to the bottom of the list. It shows up in unexplained denials for treatment, where neither the patient nor the doctor can figure out why the computer said no.
That is terrifying.
It happens when patients are routed away from specialized care without any recourse. And it happens locally to the clinicians themselves, who find themselves intensely pressured to accept AI recommendations that they cannot fully justify just to keep the line moving.
So a system can be entirely accurate, on average, looking great to the hospital board, but devastatingly harmful in the specific context of one patient's life.
And that is the profound mismatch we are facing. AI systems are fundamentally designed to optimize for institutional efficiency. But the human caregivers, they're the ones who are held legally and morally responsible for the individual outcomes of the patients in front of them.
Outcomes they no longer fully control.
Exactly. Agency has migrated completely to the machine, but the heavy burden of responsibility has been left resting entirely on the human.
It is incredibly unfair to the caregiver and incredibly risky for the patient. And what drives this entire dynamic, the invisible engine behind all of this, is speed.
Yes, speed.
One of the most insidious things going on here is the sheer speed of these systems. It is not just a cool technological feature. It is actually acting as a hidden enemy.
Speed is typically sold to us as a pure benefit. Faster analysis, faster triage, faster lab results. But the text frames speed as a silent disabler of judgment. It argues that speed is actually a governance variable.
A governance variable. Break that down for us.
It means the faster the system moves, the less governance or control you actually have over it. As AI accelerates decision-making to fractions of a second, the windows for human escalation shrink to almost nothing.
Because there literally isn't time to think.
Exactly. The cost of reflecting on a decision becomes too high for the busy hospital workflow.
Right. In these hyperfast systems, any human hesitation is suddenly reframed as an inefficiency. If a nurse pauses to question an algorithm's dosage recommendation, they are holding up the line.
And so the system begins conditioning humans.
Yeah.
Clinicians learn to just trust the dashboards over their own internal dissent.
They are trained to conform.
They learn not to slow the system down unless something is glaringly, obviously catastrophic. The material makes it clear the system doesn't remove humans. It conditions them.
And that conditioning erodes something absolutely vital, which is the emotional dimension of accountability. We tend to think of accountability as a procedural thing, like filling out a form or signing your name on a chart.
But accountability is deeply emotional. People only genuinely take responsibility for an outcome when they feel a sense of ownership over the process.
You have to care.
They have to understand the consequences of their actions, and crucially, they have to believe that their intervention actually matters.
Let's ground this in the gritty reality of a hospital floor. Think about why a nurse double-checks an IV drip, even when they are totally exhausted at the end of a 12-hour shift. It is because they feel a deep, terrifying emotional weight for the human being in that bed.
They feel responsible for that life.
But the moment they are trained to just blindly click approve on an iPad screen 500 times a shift because the AI says so, that emotional weight vanishes. They stop being a caregiver and become a data entry clerk.
That transition is exactly what the source warns about. When a machine is making 90% of the choices in a fraction of a second, that feeling of ownership just disappears. The text quotes the kinds of things clinicians actually start saying in these environments.
What do they say?
They say, well, that is what the system recommended. Or I just followed protocol. Or the model flagged it, so I did it.
It would be so easy to hear those phrases and think, wow, what lazy excuses. But we shouldn't view them that way, should we?
Not at all. These are not lazy excuses. They are tragic symptoms of a system that has systematically suppressed emotional ownership.
That makes a lot of sense.
Emotional engagement is the very mechanism that keeps human beings vigilant in high-stakes environments. When automation encourages detachment, you lose that vigilance. A system that suppresses emotional ownership will eventually suppress accountability entirely.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, how on earth do we fix it? We have this rapidly accelerating system. Humans are being conditioned to act as passive witnesses. and emotional ownership is totally eroding. The source does pivot to talk about structural solutions, right?
It does, and it starts by critiquing how hospitals usually try to solve this problem. When accountability concerns are raised, the standard corporate response is to add oversight.
More bureaucracy.
Always. They create new review boards, they generate massive audit trails, they implement giant compliance checklists.
So essentially just throwing more paperwork at the problem.
Exactly. And while those things might be necessary for legal reasons, they are utterly insufficient for safety. You cannot manage this with oversight after the fact. We need a fundamental shift in architecture.
Meaning what exactly?
Governance has to be embedded into the system before the decisions accelerate.
Architecting governance rather than just doing post-game oversight. The material gives some very specific design requirements for this. Let's walk through them.
First, override authority must be explicit, not implicit. It cannot just be a theoretical right to say no. The system must physically and culturally make it easy and protected for a doctor to override the AI.
Okay, that tackles the authority condition.
Second, slowing down must be actively permitted and, more importantly, not penalized.
Let me play devil's advocate here. How does a hospital actually permit slowing down when they have an emergency room full of bleeding people? There's a massive tension there between business efficiency and medical safety.
It is a massive tension, and it requires a total cultural shift. The institution has to prioritize the time required for human judgment over the raw speed of the algorithm.
Even if it costs them table turnovers.
Exactly. If an AI flags a patient for immediate discharge, the system must be designed to pause and wait for a human to confirm that decision without tapping their watch. The institution has to absorb the cost of that time rather than passing the pressure onto the clinician.
And what about the third requirement?
Responsibility must be clearly assigned, not just vaguely inferred.
Meaning, you cannot just assume the attending physician is responsible if they had no real power to change the AI's dictated care path.
Right. You have to map out exactly who owns the decision before the system is even turned on. Accountability cannot be retrofitted. It must be architected.
Which is such a powerful takeaway. But the reason implementing these solutions is so challenging is because of how this structural failure actually presents itself in the real world. It is a subtle and highly dangerous failure.
Yes, because there is no smoking gun.
It is a quiet collapse. There is no dramatic cinematic moment where the mainframe sparks and a robot voice takes over the hospital intercom. There is no obvious villain. There is no single bad actor making a malicious choice.
Everything was fine?
The hospital appears to be functioning perfectly fine on the surface until suddenly someone gets hurt and absolutely nobody knows why.
And by the time those failures actually surface and the harm is recognized, the responsibility has been completely fragmented. There is always abundant documentation showing exactly which algorithm triggered which protocol, but absolute zero explanatory clarity.
And inevitably, the human clinician sitting at the end of the line is blamed for outcomes that were shaped by massive institutional systems they could not possibly control.
It is an institutional failure disguised as a human error.
So what does this all mean? We have covered incredibly dense, vital territory today from our source material. We started by realizing that an AI can be mathematically accurate but entirely unaccountable. We shattered the myth of the cozy human in the loop, seeing how doctors are often just witnesses to the momentum of the machine.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We explored the devastating disconnect between the aggregate success an AI reports on a spreadsheet and the local harm a patient experiences in the exam room. We saw how the sheer speed of these systems conditions human workers to abandon their emotional ownership, turning caregivers into data entry clerks.
And finally, we looked at the desperate need to architect systems where humans actually have the authority and the time to govern the machines rather than just adding more paperwork after the fact. If there's one ultimate takeaway to distill from this entire exploration, it is the deeper question posed at the very end of our material. As these automated systems inevitably grow more capable and more deeply integrated into medicine, the most important question is no longer whether they will make fewer errors.
They probably will make fewer errors.
No, they probably will. The real question is whether humans will still be positioned to make decisions when those errors inevitably do occur. Accuracy without accountability is not progress. It is just acceleration without responsibility.
Acceleration without responsibility.
And in a life-or-death field like healthcare, that is an intolerable trade-off.
It really is a chilling thought. So I want to leave you with this final provocative idea to mull over as you go about your day. We have talked entirely about healthcare today. But think about the legal system.
Oh, well, yeah.
Think about what happens when these exact same architectural flaws migrate to the courtroom. If AI begins drafting legal verdicts or predicting recidivism rates for parole boards, we aren't just risking physical health, we are risking human liberty.
The stakes are just as high.
If a judge is conditioned by speed to become a hesitant overseer to an algorithm stripping away their emotional ownership of the sentence they hand down, who goes to jail for the machine's hidden miscalculation? Next time you interact with any highly automated system, ask yourself, is the human in front of me actually empowered to fix a subtle error, or are they just a witness to the machine's momentum? Keep questioning the systems around you, stay insanely curious, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.